Welcome to Say the Question. I'm Joe, and with me is Sam. Today we're getting into the Gulf of Tonkin, and the sharper question is how national security urgency can make a story feel settled before anyone can really verify it.
Yeah, because that kind of moment is exactly when people stop checking and start reacting. The National Archives says the Maddox captain first reported being under continuous torpedo attack, then later cabled that freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonar men may have accounted for many reports.
Right, and that gap between the first alarm and the later doubt is the whole problem. So let's start with why people are suspicious. And Sam, start us off.
The uncomfortable part is not even the dispute itself. It's that national security stories get delivered in this mode where you're supposed to feel the urgency first and sort out the details later. And by later, the whole thing has already become public fact. That is why this topic still makes people squint at it.
Yeah, and the first useful move is to separate the itch from the evidence. With Tonkin, the public was told pretty quickly that U.S. ships had been attacked twice in international waters. Johnson announced airstrikes that same evening, and Congress passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution a few days later. That is an extremely fast path from reported incident to policy consequence, which is part of why it still feels slippery.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say the speed is almost the whole problem? Because once a story goes from something happened to here is the official answer that fast, the average person does not really get time to verify anything. You're not choosing between competing fact patterns in a calm room. You're being asked to react while the room is already moving.
No, that's fair. Verification in real time is the missing piece here. And that matters because the public wasn't sitting on the bridge with the radar operators. On top of that, the public did not know the Maddox was doing electronic eavesdropping to help South Vietnamese commando raids. So the cleanest version of the story was never the full operational context.
Right. So it wasn't just we were minding our business and got jumped. There was already a bigger military setup around the ship that most people could not see. And that changes how the story lands, even if you stop short of saying anybody lied outright. It's the difference between a simple headline and the nasty little footnotes nobody gets to read before the vote.
Exactly. And then you get the detail that makes everyone's eyebrows go up. The captain first reported being under continuous torpedo attack, but later cabled that freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonarmen may have accounted for many reports. That does not settle every factual dispute by itself, but it does show how wartime reporting can harden before uncertainty is resolved.
So what part of the suspicion survives if we strip away the dramatic version? Because I do not want to oversell this as some hidden master plan if the cleaner point is just that the public was handed a confident story before the confidence was justified.
That is basically the fair version. The suspicion is not, aha, we proved every motive. It's that the structure of the moment made certainty travel faster than verification. And once that happens, the first narrative gets a huge advantage. If you are a citizen, you are not checking every claim in real time. You're deciding whether the people with the megaphone have earned enough trust to be believed, while the details are still foggy.
And that is exactly why it feels manipulative, without requiring a cartoon villain. You do not need a smoking gun to see that urgency changes the psychology of the room. Fear makes people reachable, and verification starts to look like delay or disloyalty, which is a terrible place to have a public conversation.
Yeah, and that distinction is the whole point of taking the suspicion seriously without turning it into a conspiracy theory. The honest question is not, were people stupid for believing it? It's whether the design of the moment made belief easy and checking hard. Because that is a real trust problem, even when you do not have proof of deliberate deception.
And once you see that, The original story stops looking like a clean historical note and starts looking like a stress test for the public. Not proof of a giant scheme, just a reminder that when an emergency is moving fast, the story that arrives first gets to wear the authority badge for a while.
Exactly. So the next step is to look at what the first take actually was, what it leaned on, and where the public-facing certainty outpaced what was knowable at the time. That is where the real argument starts to get sharp.
My starting take is that national security emergencies turn into a persuasion cheat code because fear moves faster than verification. People are being asked to react before they can really check what happened, who knows what, or what the government is quietly assuming.
Before they can even see the seams, yeah.
Right. And I'm not saying that means every official is lying or that every emergency is fake. I'm saying the urgency itself can do a lot of the work. Because once the clock feels like it's running, the public story gets ahead of the public's ability to test it.
So the fair version is not national security equals deception. It's more like when the stakes are framed as immediate, people get pushed toward confidence before they've had time to ask the annoying questions. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, that's the better version. And the Tonkin record is interesting because it doesn't just show haste in hindsight. The State Department document says public opinion at home and abroad required prompt decision and continuing leadership if the incidents were not to turn into confusing debate that could weaken the U.S. position.
That's the part I want to keep straight. That line doesn't prove a secret plan, but it does show officials thinking in terms of urgency, political pressure, and keeping the narrative from getting muddy. And on August 3rd, Johnson was already in an impromptu press conference announcing naval orders. So the public-facing version moved fast.
Exactly. Fast is the whole issue. If the official story is out there before ordinary people can verify the facts, then a lot of the persuasion is happening in the gap between something happened and here's what you can actually prove about it.
And that gap matters because the public usually isn't reading raw cables or sitting in the room while the evidence gets sorted. They're hearing a simplified version, filtered through urgency. And then they're expected to treat that as the baseline for judgment. That doesn't mean they're helpless, but it does mean they're not working with the same information as the people making the call.
Right. And that's where the suspicion comes from. Not everybody is in on it, just the setup favors the people who can move first. If you can define the crisis before anyone else can test it, you're already shaping the range of acceptable reactions.
That's a real distinction. Persuasion is not the same as proof, and urgency is not automatically a lie. But urgency is useful if you want the first version of events to harden before people have time to compare notes. And that's enough to make a lot of otherwise reasonable people uneasy.
That's basically the uncomfortable part. You don't need a cartoon villain for the machine to work badly. You just need enough fear, enough official confidence, and not enough time for the public to sit there and say, hang on, what do we actually know?
And the non-conspiratorial version of that suspicion is pretty solid. In a crisis, the side with the clearer story usually gets there first, and the people hearing it are trying to decide under pressure. That's not proof of bad faith. It is proof that the conditions are stacked in favor of certainty over verification.
So if we're being fair, the question isn't whether every emergency is manufactured. It's whether the emergency conditions make public doubt functionally expensive. Because hesitation starts looking like weakness the second the frame is set.
Yeah, and that's the test I want to keep on the table. Not whether the event was real, but whether the urgency made certainty look available when it really wasn't. The next question is the annoying one. What could people actually have checked in the moment? And what was already baked into the story before they got there? Okay, before we get hypnotized by the two bad endings people like to jump to, we should clear those off the board. One is the shrug, wartime confusion, so nothing really matters. The other is the cartoon. It was all one perfectly coordinated lie from the first second.
Yeah, the shrug is the favorite move of people who want the story to stop bothering them. It's basically, war is messy, so don't ask follow-up questions.
And that is too convenient. A real emergency can be messy without making every complaint afterward fake. And it can also make people more willing to treat incomplete reporting like settled fact.
Right. Messy is not the same as harmless. If the public got a clean story before the evidence was actually clean, that's the problem. Not because chaos is automatically evil, but because it makes certainty cheap. Joe, what's the fairer version of the suspicious take here? Because I don't want to overstate it and accidentally turn every wartime mistake into a secret plot.
The fairer version is probably smaller and more annoying. It's not there was definitely one master villain behind everything. It's the conditions made it easier for uncertain information to get promoted as certainty, and that could shape what people believed before they could verify it.
That's less dramatic, which is exactly why it's harder for people to sit with. A messy truth is irritating. It doesn't hand you a clean villain with a neat speech bubble over his head.
No, and the clean villain version has another problem. It can outrun what the record actually supports. What we can say with confidence is narrower. Later official review separated the August 2nd attack from the August 4th claim, and those two events are not on the same footing.
And that's the distinction people flatten when they're trying to win the argument too fast. The National Archives later said the August 2nd attack was confirmed by a 2002 NSA report. The August 4th attack was later concluded not to have happened. Those are very different levels of certainty.
Exactly. So nothing happened is wrong, because something did happen on August 2nd, and later disagreement doesn't erase that. But something happened once, so everything said after that was reliable, is also wrong. And that mistake does a lot of work in public memory.
That's the first lazy answer people reach for when they want the whole thing to feel settled. Fog of war, unfortunate confusion, move along. It sounds mature, but sometimes it's just a way to avoid asking whether the public was sold a finished story before the story was finished.
And the second lazy answer is the mirror image. Every gap becomes proof of a master plan. That feels emotionally satisfying because it gives you an intentional villain. But satisfaction is not evidence. If the record is thin, we should say it's thin, not decorate it with certainty.
People really do prefer a villain they can point at. Ambiguity is annoying. It makes you hold two thoughts at once. Something was real, something was disputed, and the public version may have been firmer than the facts deserved.
And that's the part worth slowing down for. The issue is not that every wartime statement is fake. The issue is that urgency changes how claims travel. If a claim feels important enough, a lot of people will treat not yet disproven as basically true.
Which is a terrible habit because it lets fear borrow certainty it hasn't earned. And once fear is doing that, the argument about intent comes later than it should. The first damage is that the claim gets ahead of verification.
Right, and that's where the later official review matters beyond the trivia of the case. By February 1968, McNamara was testifying in closed session about both the August 2nd and August 4th events, and those hearings cast real doubt on the Johnson administration's credibility. So this wasn't just a battlefield misunderstanding people forgot about.
Yeah, once credibility gets hit, the whole thing stops being just a technical dispute. It becomes a question of what version got locked in for the public while the people with access were still sorting it out.
Exactly. But I still want to keep one hand on the brake here. A verification gap does not automatically prove someone engineered it. It proves the gap was exploitable, which is serious enough on its own. That's the difference between a weak system and a proven scheme.
So, the honest answer is not nothing happened and it's not everybody was in on it. The honest answer is that once incomplete reporting gets wrapped in national security certainty, the public is asked to trust a story before it can check the edges.
Yeah, and that's already a big deal. It means the real question isn't whether people were stupid or evil in some movie sense. It's how quickly a front-end story becomes public fact when the room with the facts is still closed to everybody else.
Okay, so let's get out of the pure vibe of it and look at the information stream, because this is where the thing starts to matter. If people were pushed to decide before they could verify much of anything, that's not a small detail. That's the whole mechanism. The question is what the public could actually know in real time and what was already being decided for them by the speed of the official story.
Right, and the public version hardened very quickly. Johnson publicly announced on August 3rd that he had ordered the Navy to continue patrols, add another destroyer, and authorize attacks if U.S. ships were attacked in international waters. That's not a slow, hazy rollout. That's a fast official frame, which matters because once the frame is public, people start arguing inside it.
And the part that jumps out is the asymmetry. The Maddox was on an intelligence mission, supporting South Vietnamese commando raids. But that wasn't publicly known at the time. So the public wasn't just missing one detail, they were missing the setup that would tell them how to read the whole event. That's a huge difference between here's an incident and here's the context that would let you judge the incident.
Exactly. That doesn't prove a sinister plan by itself, but it does explain why ordinary people couldn't independently test the story as it was unfolding. If the baseline facts are hidden, you're left reacting to the official version plus whatever fragments leak out. And in wartime, that's usually enough to make uncertainty feel like a luxury nobody has time for.
So the secrecy didn't just keep people uninformed. It changed the shape of what counted as a reasonable judgment. You're not weighing a full record. You're weighing a narrative that already has the state's thumb on the scale, even if nobody in the room says that out loud. And once the official voice is spoken, everybody else is forced to argue
and then you
uphill.
get the other detail that makes this feel so slippery. The Maddox captain first reported being under continuous torpedo attack, which is the kind of phrase that travels fast because it already sounds like a conclusion.
Yeah, and that's the brutal part. The first version is vivid, and the later version has to crawl uphill. The National Archives account says he later suggested weather effects and overeager sonar men may have accounted for many reports, which is a much messier picture than enemy attack in a headline. Once that vivid first report is out there, the correction never feels as clean as the original claim.
And that messiness matters, but we should be precise about what it proves. A later correction does not automatically mean the first report was malicious. It does show how easily a shaky field report can become public certainty when the system is under pressure and everybody wants the story to settle. That's the part people skip over when they jump straight to intent.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say urgency basically does the first draft for you? I don't mean it literally writes the lie, but it can make a thin story feel like it already passed the basic smell test before anyone has time to smell anything.
No, that's pretty close. I'd just tighten it. Urgency doesn't invent certainty out of thin air, but it lowers the cost of accepting a neat version early. People are busy. The moment feels dangerous. And the official explanation becomes the default because it arrives first and with institutional weight. That's different from saying everyone in the chain knowingly staged a falsehood.
That's the part people always want to flatten. Either it's everyone lied on purpose, or it's nothing could be known, so relax. But the more honest version is uglier. Some ambiguity is normal, and wartime urgency makes that ambiguity easier to use before anybody can really check it. It's not glamorous, it's just effective.
And there's one more useful after-the-fact angle. The National Archives notes that once contrary information surfaced, many people came to believe Congress had been conned, but that judgment came later. That's not the same thing as proving the whole thing was engineered from the start. It does show how quickly a public story can harden into moral certainty once the facts stop moving and the reputation damage starts.
Right, which is why I keep coming back to the public side of it. If the people hearing the story can't reasonably verify the setup, urgency does a lot of the work for you. It's not that fear invents facts out of thin air. It's that fear makes the first version stick before doubt can catch up. And then later, when people learn what was hidden, the whole thing looks cleaner and more deliberate in hindsight than it did at the time.
Yeah, so the fair answer isn't nothing to see here, and it's not obvious grand scheme either. It's that national security urgency gives institutions a head start, and a head start is dangerous when the public can't check the ground under the story. The next question is whether that head start was just a feature of the moment, or something people in power knew how to exploit because it worked so well.
Okay, so here's the split that actually matters. The polite version is, we got hit, we had to respond, and the country needed clarity. The uncomfortable version is, the confidence showed up before the verification did.
Yeah, and those are different claims. One is the public story that makes the moment sound clean. The other is the description of how persuasion works when people are scared and time is short.
And the public story really was that clean. Johnson's August 4th address described the attacks as unprovoked aggression and said the U.S. had responded militarily. That is a very tidy sentence for a very messy situation.
Tidy is the word. And officials also had reason to worry that public confusion could weaken the U.S. position in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. So decisiveness had its own political logic. If uncertainty looks like weakness, people start reaching for confidence a little too fast.
So we had to act fast, start sounding like a substitute for we had enough proof. Not exactly the same thing, but it can do the same job in the room.
Right, and that's where the public story starts doing more work than the evidence. It doesn't have to be a lie in the cartoon sense to be misleading in practice.
And that's the part people usually resist hearing, because they want a cleaner villain. But this is more annoying than that. Sometimes the pressure is just make it sound settled, make it sound serious, make it sound like there isn't room for a long pause.
Yeah, and if you're inside the system, you can have different people simplifying for different reasons. The person summarizing the evidence wants a crisp report. The person taking that report wants to avoid looking weak, and the person hearing it wants an answer that doesn't require a lot of delay.
So nobody has to be twirling a mustache for the result to be the same. Uncertainty gets trimmed, then trimmed again, until the public sees something more certain than what the chain actually had.
Exactly. And we do know there was real uncertainty inside that chain, because the Maddox captain later raised weather and sonar confusion as possible explanations for many reports. That matters because it shows the uncertainty wasn't invented after the fact by people trying to be contrary.
So the honest answer is not nothing happened, and it's not everybody was lying. It's that the official frame compressed a messy, uncertain situation into something easier to repeat. And once it sounded settled, settlement started standing in for proof.
That's the pressure point. Institutions reward confidence in a crisis because confidence travels better than doubt. But that means the audience can be persuaded on a much thinner base than the polished version suggests.
Joe, am I overstating it if I say the public got sold certainty before certainty existed?
A little, yes. Sold implies a level of intent we can't automatically prove from the material we have. The stronger, safer claim is that certainty was presented more strongly than the underlying evidence justified. And that is enough to explain why people feel manipulated.
Fair. And that's the ugly middle. Not a cartoon scam, not innocent paperwork either. Just a system that knows fear moves faster than verification and uses that speed.
Right. So the fair line is that the public was asked to accept a more certain story than the evidence could really carry, without jumping all the way to a claim about secret intent.
Which leaves the next problem. How far does that explanation go before we start smuggling motive in through the back door?
Yeah, that line matters, because once we cross it, we stop explaining persuasion and start inventing a villain.
Okay, but we need to throw the brakes on this before it turns into a conspiracy buffet. The cleanest version is not everyone was lying about everything. It's that a crisis can make a shaky story sound cleaner than it really was.
Right. And the boundary matters here. What we can say, pretty safely, is that the August 2nd attack was later confirmed by the National Archives summary, while the August 4th attack was later concluded not to have happened. That already gives you a serious story without adding extra machinery we cannot prove.
And then you have the later credibility mess. McNamara testifying in 1968, the hearings, casting aspersions on the Johnson administration's credibility, all of that. So the public is not crazy for thinking, okay, something got massaged here.
Sure, but something got massaged is not the same as a single coordinated lie was proven. Those are different claims. One says the public story got simplified under pressure. The other says deliberate fabrication. And we do not get to collapse them just because the first one feels morally unsatisfying.
Yeah, and the reason that distinction matters is that a lot of bad history gets flattened into one cartoon villain. The messier truth is usually more boring and more useful. People were rushed, the evidence was noisy, and then the public-facing version got sharpened because sharp versions travel better.
Exactly. The National Archives material about the Maddox captain is useful for that too. Weather effects on radar, overeager sonarmen, that kind of thing. That is a good reminder that confusion can produce confident-sounding reports without proving intent to deceive. Bad information can spread because people are rushed, scared, or trying to make sense of a mess.
So if I'm trying to say this in the fairest possible way, it's not the government is secretly the same thing as a comic book villain. It's that institutions have a habit of turning uncertainty into something cleaner and more usable when the stakes are high. But Joe, where do you draw the line between the story got cleaned up and
there was a deliberate lie we can prove? Right there. If the evidence only gets us to pressure, simplification, and people passing along the version that sounds most decisive, then we should stay there. That's still a real critique. It just is not proof of hidden authors.
That part is annoying because The honest version is less dramatic, but it's also the version that survives contact with the facts. You can say, the pressure rewarded confidence, the crisis punished doubt, and the polished story started acting like the only responsible one, without claiming you know who planned every step.
And that is the better skeptical standard. Separate what is solid from what is tempting. The second you turn suspicion into total certainty, you stop being careful and start handing the whole discussion to the most dramatic version of it.
So the line is, fair suspicion says the crisis let uncertainty get laundered into confidence. Overreach says, we know the hidden motive and can fill in every blank. That distinction is annoying, but it is also the only one that keeps us honest. Okay, so the boundary is clear now. The next question is the annoying one, but it is the useful one. Who gets rewarded when everybody moves fast, sounds confident, and nobody has time to check the story before it hardens into truth?
A lot of people, which is part of why this keeps happening. Officials get to look decisive. The press gets something legible to put on the page, and the public gets a simple answer before the messy part has time to spread. That does not mean anyone is twirling a mustache. It means the incentives all lean towards certainty.
Right, and in a national security panic, hesitation starts looking like weakness. So if you're the person in charge, you are not just deciding what happened, you're also deciding whether you want to be seen as the person slowing everybody down while the room is already moving.
Exactly. The State Department history record says public opinion at home and abroad would require prompt decision and continuing leadership if the Tonkin incidents were not to turn into confusing debate that could weaken the U.S. position. That is not a hidden plot claim. It is a very ordinary political pressure to keep the story tight, decisive, and easy to repeat.
And once that becomes the game, ambiguity is basically poison. We think this happened, but we're still checking sounds honest to normal people. But in a crisis, it can sound like you do not know what you're doing. That is exactly the kind of moment where the cleaner version starts winning before the evidence has even caught its breath. Joe, am I overstating the self-protection part, or is that actually the cleanest explanation for why people double down once they have already gone public with the firmer version?
No, that is a real piece of it. If you are an official and you go out with a confident version first, it is much easier to defend that version than to admit uncertainty and hand critics a gap to work with. But I would not reduce it to ego alone. Sometimes it is reputation. Sometimes it is strategy. And sometimes it is just the fear of being the person who makes the country look hesitant.
That is a nasty little trap, because none of that requires a grand conspiracy. It just means the safer move for the people in the room is often the less honest move for everybody else. And once enough people are making that calculation at once, the public gets a cleaner story that feels complete even when it is not.
The public is also operating with less information than the people inside the room. The National Archives notes that the Maddox was on an intelligence mission supporting South Vietnamese commando raids, but that was not publicly known at the time. So people were depending on official framing instead of being able to check the whole picture themselves. When verification is delayed, the first confident explanation has a huge advantage.
And the same tempo affects everybody else around it. Journalists want a readable frame, officials want room to maneuver, and the public wants to know whether to be afraid right now. So the version that shows up first and sounds finished gets treated like the grown-up answer, even though it may just be the fastest one.
Yeah, and the ugly part is that the correction usually arrives too late to change the emotional shape of the story. By then, the public has already learned which version was easiest to believe under pressure. And that lesson matters even after the details get refined. So the practical answer is not that fear always creates lies. It is that fear often gets there first, and verification has to fight uphill after that.
Okay, so if we're landing this, the honest answer is the dangerous part wasn't just that something might have been wrong. It was that the urgent story could move faster than ordinary people could verify it. Once that happens, you're not really debating facts anymore. You're debating whether you trust the people handing you the facts.
Yeah, that's the core of it. The strongest version of the claim is not everybody lied or there was one master plan. It's that national security urgency creates a system where confidence gets rewarded before verification can catch up. That is a much more boring sentence than a conspiracy theory, but it's also a better one.
So, Joe, am I overstating it if I say the real pressure point is that certainty gets rewarded faster than caution? Because that's what it feels like. If you wait for clean proof in the middle of a scare, you already lost the timing game.
No, that's basically it. I'd just tighten it one notch. It's not that caution is impossible. It's that caution is socially expensive once a confident story is already moving. The public isn't being asked to do something unreasonable. It's being asked to decide before the checking is done.
Right, and that's why we shouldn't overclaim on the history either. Later evidence supported the August 2nd attack, and later evidence concluded the August 4th attack did not happen. That's the clean bottom line, and it's cleaner than a lot of the noise around it.
Exactly. And the fact that the Tonkin Gulf resolution became controversial in the undeclared war that followed matters because it shows the long afterlife of a rushed security narrative. The initial moment may be messy, but the consequences are not limited to that moment. They keep going.
That's the part I keep coming back to. Uncertainty doesn't get treated like uncertainty in those moments. It gets hidden or smoothed over or shoved into the footnotes where nobody under pressure is going to read it. Then everybody acts surprised later that the public didn't magically separate the signal from the panic. And if the official story is moving fast enough, people start treating hesitation like a character flaw.
It doesn't mean the public is helpless or stupid.
Right, exactly. That's the important distinction. I'm not saying regular people should have omniscient levels of doubt on demand. I'm saying the structure of the moment pressures them to accept a clean story before they can reasonably test it.
And that's why the useful caution is process-based. Ask what can be checked now, what is still a claim, and what is being asked to ride on confidence alone. That sounds annoying because it is annoying, but it's the right question when the stakes are high and the clock is loud.
So the fair conclusion is not never believe anything urgent. That's lazy and useless. It's more like if the stakes are high and the narrative is moving fast, assume verification is lagging and don't let confidence do the job of evidence. Joe, where would you draw the line between healthy skepticism and just tuning out?
I'd draw it at the evidence. If something can be checked and nobody is checking it, that's a problem. If something can't be checked yet, then the honest move is to say so plainly instead of making the uncertainty disappear. Skepticism stops being useful when it turns into automatic disbelief. Before that, it's just discipline.
Which is really the whole thing. You don't need a villain movie in your head. You just need to admit that institutions have incentives, deadlines, and reputational pressure. And those things can make a story feel settled before it is settled. Nobody has to twirl a mustache for the evidence to get edged out.
Yeah, so the episode doesn't say the Gulf of Tonkin was one simple lie from one obvious mastermind. It says the public was vulnerable to a fast, confident narrative because verification lags, especially in national security crises. That's the caution worth keeping.
And that caution is simple enough to remember. When fear moves first, verification is playing catch-up from the start. So the citizen's job is not blind trust and not reflexive panic. It's to treat urgent official certainty as provisional until it survives checking.
Exactly. Make uncertainty visible early, because hiding it doesn't remove it. It just gives the loudest version of the story a head start. So, that's the end of this one. Thanks for joining us on Say the Question. Subscribe or follow, and we'll be back tomorrow.